There are a lot of stats that matters in the battle cats, whether it's health, attack, and range. They are obviously the main ones. I've also covered the significance of speed multiple times in different videos, but now I want to talk about one that is usually more rarely talked about, a stat that can completely redefine the role of a unit: knockback count. Knockback count is fairly self-explanatory. It's the amount of, well, knockback animations a unit can have before they die. The death knockback counts as one knockback, so a unit with one knockback means they will not get knocked back unless they die. A unit with two knockbacks means a unit will do their knockback animations when their health has reached under 50% health, and once more after it dies. A unit with 5 knockbacks means a unit will do their knockback animations every time it loses 20% of its total health. Not to be confused with normal knockback, I'm talking about the damage knockback. I think you should be able to see the difference. However, a unit doesn't necessarily always perform the amount of knockbacks it has in one life. What I'm trying to say is, for example, a unit with 3 knockbacks can still die in one shot, and in the end, it'll only perform 1 knockback in one life. Up until this point, I don't think there's anything confusing, right? So back on topic, what was that about redefining role that I said earlier? Well, it's not really as strict as it sounds, but I think by observing the range, health, and the knockback count of a unit, you could get a decent general idea on what role a unit has. For example, if a unit has low range, low knockback count, and high health, then they are usually a true tanker. These are units like Jamira family, Cradle, Kai, Cat Machine, Green Shell, and even to an extent, Eraser. If a unit has low range, somewhat high knockback count, and relatively high health, they're generally your run-in-the-mill low-range damagers. Generally super rares like Can, Fishman, the Island family, Balrog, etc. Units with high range, mediocre health, and high knockback counts are your generic range attackers. This includes things like Paris, Dragon, Drama Cats, Muhammad, Ururun, and basically like every single generalist Ubers. But then there also come some outliers like Kung Fu Cat, Fencer Cat, Ruri, Gamirion, and some others. Ruri has tanker health and low knockback count, but she has high range. Kung Fu and Fencer has decent range, but relatively low health and only 1 knockback count. Does Ruri and Gamirion count as a tanker or a ranger? Does Kung Fu and Fencer count as a ranger or just an entirely different thing? Well, like I said earlier, knockback count doesn't strictly define a unit's role. The better answer on what does knockback count can define is whether a unit is meant to survive or tank through. Or on the other hand, you can also say on whether a unit is sturdy or not. Whether a unit is a tanker or a ranger or a damager doesn't exactly matter much to the eye of knockback count. Knockback count defines something as easy as follows. If you have low knockback count, you're focused on being sturdy. If you have high knockback count, you're more focused on surviving. Of course, there are outliers to this. The basic cat family generally has 3 knockback counts, but they just die in 1 hit, so this doesn't really matter. The Cyberpunk and the Luga family, with the exception of Shishilan and Legaluga, has only 1 knockback count, but they are far from being sturdy. They only have 1 knockback count because this balances out their survivability. And besides, they usually only die in 1 hit anyways, unless they have survivor ability. Being sturdy doesn't necessarily mean that they're a tank, but it definitely generally means that they are more capable of receiving damage without getting interrupted or knocked back. For example, Solar Cat. Although Solar is far from being a tanker unit, he only has 2 knockback counts. While this generally puts him in a disadvantage as his survivability is not limited to only 2 knockbacks, this however gives him an extra edge against the likes of Elizabeth. Due to its knockback count only being 2, it is able to approach Elizabeth without getting knocked back too easily, despite taking many wave hits and not having a significantly high health. Ring Girl Cat also has only 2 knockback counts. Her true form increased this to 4 knockback count, which makes this unit's survivability better. But take this as an example. Ring Girl at a very high level is able to tank Hermit Cat's wave attack without getting knocked back, giving it an odd way to use in floor 30 if her level is high enough. Other similar examples are Fencer being able to take hits from Corporal Wayland without getting knocked back, or how Dancer Cat was used back then in Subterranean Stalker to tank through pigeon waves as well as small hits way before the existence of Octopus Cat. Kung Fu or Dancer is still even a choice to be used in floor 40, as it won't get interrupted if it accidentally got hit by Gabriel's or Mr. Angel's. Maglev and Bullet Train also has only 1 knockback, and it helps the unit in landing precise hits as it ignores LD on wave attacks that doesn't kill it in one shot, which helps in scenarios such as 430 and no return flights, as well as many others. These, however, are mostly for units that aren't actually tankers. Of course, the low knockback counts are generally made for tankers, and ranged tanker units also exist. I feel like these are generally self-explanatory though, especially for your generic tankers like Jamira, Sadako, Green Shell, Kaikat Machine, and so on, as well as tanker meat shields like Eraser, Ramen, Rover, Primordial, etc. So let's move on to ones with the high knockback count. These are most definitely anything but tankers. I don't believe there are any units with high knockback count that are also considered as tanker. They could have high health, yeah, but their job is probably not to soak hits. They generally survive longer than tankers do, even if said tankers have higher health. While 3 knockbacks isn't exactly the highest amount of knockback counts in general, it is generally still used for a lot of units whose main job is to survive as much as possible. The Dragon, Lex, and Paris family all has 3 knockback counts, which helps them reposition every time they take some damage. A lot of other units like Drama, Sanzo, Archer Cat, Delinquent, Volter, Pirate, Jizo, Ururun, Bahamut, and so on also has 3 knockback counts. These are, as you can see, mostly units that are ranged attackers that you want to see survive as long as possible. There's also the Island family and units like Maximum Divider, whose jobs are sometimes it's also to tank hits, but has 3 knockbacks anyways. While this is the case, Island family is still usually more used for their damaging aspect rather than their tanking capability, although they are still more than capable of tanking many red enemies. Lots of generalist ranged Ubers are also usually hanging around the 3 to 5 knockback counts, or even sometimes 6 knockback counts. I won't list them all because there's just too much. Just think of generic ranged generalist Ubers, and there's a good chance that they have around those knockback counts. Rarely you'd see ones with 2 knockback counts like Moving Castle or Makako. There is a reason why Shishilan and the 2 Mitamas felt like they're immortal. Shishilan has 100 knockback counts and Mitama has 50 knockback counts. They basically get knocked back by any kind of small damage. This allows them to reposition to safety after taking very minimal damage. Shishilan has always been praised for its survivability, but if you look at its health, his health isn't actually really tanky, but due to its knockback count, Shishilan usually survives even longer than the other Ubers. Range units aside, there are also melee units with high knockback counts like the Cow family, Hip Hop, Swimmer, Jurassic Cat. All these have some amount of knockback counts despite having little to no range. But of course, none of these are tanker. They're meant to do some damage and the knockback count helps them stay alive a little longer, although this doesn't really help the Cow family that much. It simply helps them to stay on the field longer and potentially do more damage instead of running into danger and receiving too much damage. Speaking of Swimmer, high knockback counts has also been used as an advantage for rusher type units like Yukimura, Blanca, Kalissa, Awakened Bahamut, Supercat, Boxcat, and like I mentioned earlier, Swimmer or Fishman. These are used to reset their attack animation. This is commonly known as rebound. These units will reset their attacks every time they get knocked back, making them attack much more often if they get knocked back a lot. This can lead into a gigantic amount of damage output in a short amount of time, or in Supercat's case, reapplying his weaken to the same enemy or multiple different enemies more often. This of course doesn't really only apply to cat units. Enemies takes advantage of these as well. Say for example, Brolos, Puffington, and Puffly, and even to an extent, Gabriel and Dark Doges. These enemies all can reset their attack animations after getting knocked back, and these guys have a lot of knockback counts. Hitting them with small damage per hits generally means death to your frontline defenses. Aside from that, there are also a lot of enemies with generally high knockback count that makes them feel like they have way higher health than they actually have. Some very common examples are Teacher Bear, Randy, Delphina, Misaka, and Inumusha. These enemies could feel like they have gigantic amount of health while in actuality, their health isn't actually that strong. It's simply the fact that they reposition so very often that it makes it feel like they're invincible. I mean, it's not like they have low health, they just really have high survivability. Every knockback is a chance for the enemy to hide behind another enemy or take cover within a backline's enemy area, especially on cases such as Teacher Bear and Randy. Chipping them down with low damage will take you much longer to kill them compared to nuking them with high damage per hit. For example, trying to kill Teacher Bear in Empire of Cats using Cow or Ninja that has high attack speed but deals low damage per hit will take you forever to kill. while using dragons and titans that deals high damage per hit with low attack rate, kills Teacher Bear in just a couple of shots. Another example are the Rain Beast in Forest Beast. Every time it gets knocked back, it either positions themselves so that your units will be forced to enter Manic Flying's range, or positions itself so that it takes cover behind one of the boars, thus making the process of killing it extremely tedious without doing it properly, or using Cyberpunk. There are other less extreme examples of enemies who reposition themselves often, such as Hna, Bun variants, Arost and Amos, Raging Bahamut, and so on. They have high enough knockback count to reposition often, but not high enough to be insanely annoying. Backliner enemies like Mr. Mole, Loris, and the enemy Crazed Dragon variant, or even King Wawa, can take advantage of their also high knockback count to take cover behind short-range enemies every time they get knocked back too. The example I had earlier with Raindy and Forest Beast also applies, for example, with Arost and Realm of Carnage. Despite all these, killing enemies fast isn't everything. Sometimes you can abuse this high knockback count to your advantage. One of the more commonly used examples is abusing Miss Haka's knockback count. Take for example Floor 27 or the Haunted One LDK. One of the original strat for this stage is to stack up a huge amount of rangers on the gravy. You can then use this stack to permanently knock Haka away so she won't get through your defenses, because she will get knocked back very easily by your stack. Another example is chaining Awakened Bahamut, such as chaining Rain Beast and Hungry Forest, Scorched Tallboot, or Forest Beast, where you can rush it down while keeping Bahamut safe, as Bahamut always knocks it back since they have high knockback count. Chaining Bahamut for the Hna and Learn to Love is also a thing, as Bahamut deal just enough damage to knock Hna back in one hit so that you may rush it down. There are a lot of other examples I can give out, but you get the idea by now. Enemies with low knockback count, however, are generally meant to either wall you down or act as a pusher. You know, they're sturdy, or they could be both. Case in point, wall doges, dash huns, Adas, one-horn variants, most boar variants, Kit Tapa, or even backliners like Kamel variants, Slot variants, Laboyne variants, enemy Craze Tank variants, Bird variants, and so on and so on. Even enemies like Debu and Papu are basically just gigantic wall boss. Similar to cats, these doesn't mean they're necessarily tanks. They're just very sturdy and not easy to move, but that doesn't necessarily mean they all have giant health, though they generally do. For example, the Adas and Draconians are meant to wall you down and push you. Same goes to the Adas in No Return Flight. However, they aren't actually insanely tanky, they're just really sturdy. The wall doges in Private Rainforest is also meant to absorb hits from your single target attackers like Kadar and Dragons, so it would be harder to use them against Cadaver Bear behind it. Kit Tapa in Big Bang 2 is also meant to stop you from rushing Godcat down easily, and the list goes on. Going back to cat units, I think it should be important to note that knockback count is one of those stats that has no definitive preferred amount. Similar to speed, having either high or low amount of these doesn't always necessarily mean something is better or worse. Sometimes it just means their role will change or their style of being used is change. Same goes to enemies. Enemies don't necessarily become easier or harder with different knockback amounts. It just means they will have different behaviors, they will have different synergies. They could be used in different situations with different enemies. For example, you could say a Teacher Bear with 1 knockback count is basically just moot, or a Big Sal with high knockback count is just Miss Haka. These enemies are used in completely different synergies, yet they're very similar if you don't take knockback count into account. Similar can be applied to cats, where changing the knockback count of a unit can redefine the unit in many different ways. Of course, some cats might be more or less unaffected by it, and there are some units that you generally want to have higher or lower knockback count, but there's usually still some sort of niche advantage from it. For example, a unit like Oda, who currently only have 1 knockback count, you usually want these sort of units to have high knockback counts instead, as it increases their survivability much better. But currently his 1 knockback count can also be used to give him the ability to tank Lenoir hits without getting flinched, so that it is able to freeze Lenoir even if Lenoir hits him. Is it worth it? Probably not, but it is a thing and there are many examples like this. So what is the morale of this video? The true meaning of this video? It is to show us humans too work differently from each other. There are advantages of being brave and there are advantages of being more careful. Neither of these are necessarily better than the other, but they both can prove themselves to be more fitting during certain situations. Sometimes the brave can be too reckless and the careful can be too paranoid. And if you happen to experience these sort of things, it's fine. Everyone at some point is either a dumbass or a fucking coward. That's right, I'm judging you all now. Anyways, as usual, if you have any questions regarding this topic or any insights you'd like to share, do comment about it, as I'd like to see what you guys have in mind. I personally like it when there's a couple of units who has the stats of a mid-ranger or a ranger while having low knockback count, or a unit with tanker stats having high knockback count, as they give pretty funny interactions and weird usages in many ways you won't expect. Yeah, they're generally not so good in many situations, but somehow it's able to contribute on stages where they don't look like they belong, which is pretty amusing. That aside, I hope you enjoyed this video, or perhaps even now have different insights on the game or for different units. That is all. See you next time. I personally like it when there's a couple of units who has the stats. Oh my god. Shut the fuck up, dog. Oh my god. I will eat this dog. Good. Oh.